Hello and welcome to Green Friday. I'm Alex Mulcahy, the publisher of Grid Magazine. Today, we'll be talking with Councilmember Gauthier about a report that her office produced called The Geography of Affordable Housing in Philadelphia's Third District. Now, this is a report she felt compelled to make because she really felt like developers were not taking her seriously when she said that the district needed more affordable housing. So she wanted to provide them with proof. This document does show just how much housing insecurity there is in West Philadelphia in the third district. It's not surprising to see it, but it still manages to shock you when you see the numbers. So today we will talk with Councilmember Gauthier about the threat to Mantua and other West Philly neighborhoods of gentrification and dislocation. We will also discuss a policy that she thinks would help affordable housing considerably. And finally, the promise of tiny houses. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Thank you for your time today.
Absolutely.
I was bowled over by the geography of affordable housing in Philadelphia's third district. You know, part of me, sometimes I feel like for people to understand something, they need a story. They need a single story about somebody who's suffering. But then other times I feel like numbers can be extremely powerful. And that's how I feel about this report. I mean, it's staggering. Tell me, where to begin? Tell me how did this come to be?
Housing is something that I tend to focus on a lot. You know, I'm an urban planner. I've spent a lot of my career in the affordable housing space. And I just have a belief that people need access to safe, affordable housing in order to build a stable, good quality of life. And also that people of all incomes deserve to live in amenity-rich neighborhoods, right? With not only good secure housing, but with parks and with grocery stores and with good schools and with transit, right? And I'm feeling increasingly like those type of neighborhoods are moving outside of the reach of working people in the third district. And, I talked a lot with people about this issue during my campaign. I knocked a lot of doors during the campaign every single day. And this was one of the issues that, was most on people's minds. People talked to me about seeing their neighbors get displaced. People talked to me about not being able to make the repairs that they need to make on their homes because they can't afford it. They talk to me about seeing their neighborhoods change in a way that they don't recognize. And so this became like a core part of my platform of the change that I wanted to make in this district. And, I'm in conversations with people who want to develop housing here probably several times a week, right? And I'm constantly pushing on the price of the housing that they want to build here in the third district. And I would feel, be in these conversations and telling these developers, like, people who live in this community cannot afford this level of housing. And I feel like the response was somewhat condescending, and I wanted to back up what I was saying with actual data. And so that was one of the reasons for the study. And I also wanted to arm my community members who are engaged in this conversation about development with real data that they could use to, help advocate for the communities that they want to live in.
Yeah, and some of these numbers, 70% of rents in the third district cost more than, maybe this is in the third district entirely, or maybe it's neighborhoods, cost more than $750, which only 35% of the residents can afford. And that's such a yawning disparity.
It's a huge gap, right? And so I think it's important to lay out the landscape. Like, obviously, it's not just, private for-profit developers that have to deal with this issue. The city has to deal with this issue. The state has to deal with this issue. The federal government has to deal with this issue. The community has to understand and deal with this issue. But we all have to be operating from a place of understanding what is happening, what the state of affordable housing is, and what the gap is between what we have and what we need. And so that statistic in particular is staggering, but it's the truth. And that is a district specific statistic.
A bigger picture is $15.6 million per month. That's the shortfall in subsidies for West and Southwest Philly, extending beyond the third district, but all of West Philly and Southwest Philly.
That's in the third district. That's a third district figure too.
And that puts a number to it, and then 74 million, over 74 million for the city entirely. So yeah. It's a massive problem. When you campaigned, one of the things that you, as you said, front and center was you talked about gentrification. I need a little education on this. What tools are there to slow it down? And then what can you specifically do as a council member?
I absolutely think that we have to use policy in a more aggressive way to ensure that we have equitable neighborhoods, right? And to ensure that people are not displaced. I think we have a responsibility to do that. One policy that I am pushing for and hoping to introduce this session is around mandatory inclusionary zoning. So this would say that developers are mandated to build a level of affordability in what it is that they're constructing in the district. What we have now is voluntary inclusionary zoning. So that was legislation that Councilmember Maria Quinones Sanchez worked on several years ago. It was a fight, she had a huge fight on her hands in getting that legislation passed. But that legislation says that if developers want, a bonus for density and height, they can choose to either add affordable housing units into their developments or contribute to the Housing Trust Fund, which is used to support a variety of affordable housing units across the city. That's a great thing in that it's put millions of dollars into the Housing Trust Fund, and that's necessary, needed money for a variety of efforts. However, it's resulted in only a handful of actual affordable units being put into developments across the city. Moreover, the money that goes into the trust fund can be used to support affordable housing development and preservation all across the city. So if you could get a market rate development here in the third district and someone contributing to the trust fund, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people in this district are going to see an offsetting direct benefit, because that money can be spent anywhere. And so I think it's very important that we have the units in our neighborhoods. And the real estate and who owns it and the pricing of it is going to determine who can have access to a neighborhood and who can't. And I don't think that that's something that we should just leave to chance or to the whims of developers. I think we have to use policy to impact this. And so that's a policy that I'm very excited about. Another one that I'm working on is legislation that would give preference to grassroots organizations trying to organize community land trusts and take hold of, some portion of our city's massive amount of city-owned vacant land and property. And so this would allow, these organizations to be able to compete in a better way with other folks who were trying to get a hold of this land, and to have more time and space and support to put that land back to use for things that will benefit our community, like affordable housing, like urban gardens, like green spaces. So that's something I'm pretty excited about as well. And in general, I think our city-owned vacant land and property, particularly in gentrifying neighborhoods, is a really big tool in this fight, right? To have equitable neighborhoods. And we have to use that land and property much more strategically towards affordable housing. I also think that we have to do much more to protect and support renters. Renters are some of the most vulnerable people in our housing market, and they need more relief. Last year, I was proud to work with Council Members Gim and Brooks on the Emergency Housing Protection Act that kept, thousands of renters in their units during this massive public health crisis. And we also advocated a lot for the rental subsidy program, that the city was able to put into place. I think we need to do more of that. I think from a policy perspective, we need to do more to protect and support renters. And from a financial perspective, we need to do more to put subsidy, directly into the hands of renters. I think that could help. I think we need to do as much as we can to help homeowners to get funding that can help them to make necessary repairs. And I mean, hopefully free funding, grant funding, if we're able to do that and to subsidize that effort. And so those are some of the things that I think can help in this fight to kind of stabilize and make sure that we have equitable neighborhoods. And I also think community engagement is key in this, and building the capacity of registered community organizations and other organizations that are bringing residents to the table and allowing them to have a voice and really shape the future of their communities.
The mandatory inclusion you were talking about before, are there examples around the country where this type of legislation passed?
Yes, Chicago has pretty robust mandatory inclusionary zoning ordinance, and so does New York.
And do you feel like this has some momentum?
Yeah, I feel like it can, and and certainly we're going to engage our community members. We're going to engage the development community. We're going to listen. But at the end of the day, I feel like this does have momentum, and it will have momentum, and it's time. It's time to use policy in this way to really demand equity within our neighborhoods.
And you mentioned renters. Here's a stat that hopefully I did the math right, because this was not in your report, but 19.8% spend more than 50% of their income on housing.
Yeah. So almost half of the district is cost burden.
And that's 40, I think that number was 43%. And then the next thing down is I was talking about the severely cost burden, but go ahead, talk about the cost burden. Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure we were taking this in kind of, rungs. Yeah. So a good 43% of the district is cost burden, meaning they spend, at least 30% of their income on their housing costs. But you're right, a significant portion of people are severely cost burdened, right? Meaning they spend 50% at least of their income on their housing.
Those obviously are very vulnerable people, and these are the types of renters that you want to keep protected and in houses.
Yep.
The tool, strategic planning tool, has so much information, and some of the income disparity between Mantua, $19,605 is the annual income per household there, and then Powelton Village, which there's just a little line on the map, $113,000.
Yeah, and if you think about Mantua, right, it's positioning near the university, it's close to the art museum. It's still a neighborhood that has a good amount of vacant land, right? And so developers are absolutely seizing on that opportunity. And our push is to make sure, one, that the community is empowered, is engaged, is at the table, but secondly, that there's equity in what is happening, and that folks are not just being further displaced.
Educate me on something I should understand. If I'm a developer and I want to build something in your district, do I need your approval to do that?
Not all the time. There are certain things that can happen by right, depending on zoning code. But if you need a zoning variance, which happens a lot, and if you are aiming to get city-owned lands, those are both things that approve that. Council members can legislate zoning changes. So you would definitely need my involvement and sort of buy-in for that. But there's also the variance process that just happens normally, which is dependent on the community's approval. And most of the time, we try to be in lockstep with the community members, and we voice our opposition if we feel like, there hasn't been enough engagement, that the developer is not listening, that we didn't see, a democratic process happen. So it's very, I think, important to have the support and engagement of your council member with any type of zoning change that is needed. And, council has to pass legislation for any disposition of city-owned vacant land and property. That does not happen without the explicit approval of city council. But even when, that approval isn't needed, we engage with people, right? And we try to negotiate for things that will be beneficial for the community. We try to help community members create community benefit agreements. Most of the time, a developer is going to want to work again and again in the same place. So it behooves them to have good relationships with the community members in the council office, and for us to be, on the same page. Mm-hmm. So I can't influence everything, and there are a lot of things that I can't influence, but there are many places where I can use, the leverage that I have to push for things that will be beneficial to the community. But the reason why also I'm trying to use policy is because it's exhausting to do that on a project by project basis. It's exhausting for me to try to negotiate more affordable units in every individual project that comes past my desk. It's better for me to say, this is the policy, this is what it is, and I can impact, more projects in that way.
One project that I found extremely intriguing, the potential for tiny houses. How far along is that?
They're still in the RFI stage, so they're still getting proposals, and I'm not allowed to really interface with the proposal process. So all I know is that they're accepting applications at this point, and they keep sort of extending the deadline, which makes me think that they want to get more interest.
Right.
But I'm excited about it. I'm excited about seeing how we can use tiny houses as a way of getting people more housing affordability and more support too.
I think I remember seeing a story where you met with Lancaster Housing.
It was super cool. Yeah, it was a cool visit, and I enjoyed seeing what it is that they do and that they offer.
Could you imagine living in one?
I think I do live in one. I was like, oh, this is like my apartment.
Friends who, especially in New York, are like, we've got the tiny house thing. My apartment's 500 square feet. There you go. I think what I read too is that there's potentially something in Northeast Philly that's being developed.
That sounds like it's moving forward faster. It's a different model. So that one is more of the traditional tiny house village model where, people get sort of some private, accommodations in their unit, but things like bathrooms, kitchens, community spaces are shared. And it's for people mostly that are, coming directly off of the street, who have been homeless, and it's to provide them with a high level of support. And so, it's sort of creates this community, but it's also integrated with a lot of social services and peer support. It's also transitional housing. So the thought is that people would stay in the village for a certain amount of time and then move on to another more secure, permanent housing situation. The model that will be coming to the third district is permanent housing. It's a self-contained unit. You have everything you need within your unit. There is social services wrapped into it, but it's less intense than in the village model. And people also will get their rent subsidized in that model, at least for the first few years.
I should mention that I go on vacation, I have for the last 2 years. It's a family camping, and they have the model that they're talking about in the Northeast, where you get a very small cabin that you stay in, like you're tight with your family, and then the bathroom showers and the eating is communal. Like I'm really interested in the guy who runs that camp is very big into co-housing. That's something that is so cool. The idea that people are in a community and they have shared access to maybe open land or kitchens. It's a really cool model. But that said, transitional housing is important, but you want long-term housing. You want places for people to stay. One last thing I wanted to ask about is in the report, there's the AMI, the average median income, that determines how much people think or estimate what housing should cost for low-income tenants. That can be misleading. Can you explain how the AMI sometimes doesn't give you the true picture?
So it's a definition, mostly that is determined federally. It stands for area median income, but the way that the area is defined for our region, it includes like the main line. So it's drastically skewed because the income in the suburbs is just radically different than the income here in Philadelphia. And so what our report found was that the average, third district resident is covering a little over 30% of AMI. Meanwhile, you have developers coming here wanting to build housing that they're calling affordable at 80% of AMI. That means like nothing to most people who live here, right? It's so beyond the reach of what they can afford that I don't even know if you can call it affordable anymore, right? And so we also wanted with this report to shed some light on this, on what's truly affordable and affordable to whom, for the people who live in West and Southwest Philadelphia.
And you had the partners, the reinvestment fund were part of this. And then a neighbor of mine, just a few houses down, Ken Stife.
Yeah.
At Urban Spatials. How was that project like working with them?
It was fantastic. It was fantastic to get all of the data from the reinvestment fund, who's focused on this for a very long time, and to build a tool with Urban Spatial that can allow us and our community members and folks at the city to really identify where affordability is a problem and where we should be kind of targeting our efforts. So I think that piece is really cool, and I'm glad that we could do that together.
Cool. Well, I think I will thank you for your time. It's a pleasure talking with you. It's great to see you on a personal level. It's great to see you as a resident of West Philadelphia. I am delighted to call you Councilmember Gauthier.
Thank you so much. And it's really good to see you and to get to talk to you again. It's been like much too long.